MCQ 28 asks about the properties of an alloy. So let's start off first by understanding what is the definition of an alloy. It is a mixture of metal with other metal, and something very important to remember, and or non-metals. Now, by indicating that it's a mixture, that means that there is no fixed proportion, and the act of creating a mixture is via a physical method rather than a chemical method. So I will say that a chemical reaction between two metals is not true because it should have been a physical reaction, and since there's no fixed proportion, it could not have been represented with a molecular formula. But the base of any alloy would have always been a metal itself. So a metal would have cations, and for the case of these cations, they must have also been surrounded by a sea of mobile electrons. So if there is any ability to conduct electricity, it would have been because the sea of mobile electrons that was present. But for the case of an alloy, you're going to add in other elements within. Although not being mentioned in the question here is that the other elements that's added, it actually disrupt the cation layers. And the consequence of disrupting the cation layers is that now the cation layers is unable to slide, and it loses its malleability. So it's now becoming less flexible, but in return, it actually increases in its rigidity. So by altering the amount of the metals or the non-metals that's placed into the metal structure itself, we can actually affect the malleability of the metal. So a perfect example for this question here would be to talk about your high-speed steel as compared to mild steel. Now both of them are actually alloy of iron that comes with varying different amount of carbon. In high-speed steel, we have a high amount of carbon, and this causes high-speed steel to be extremely rigid, but it loses its flexibility. For the case of mild steel, to preserve its flexibility, the amount of carbon is actually much lesser. So it's much more flexible, but it's not as rigid as your high-speed steel. So going back to the option itself, as going back from the summary of different kind of steel, they are good conductors of electricity because they have mobile ions. This is incorrect. It has to be due to the sea of mobile electrons as charge carriers. So D would have been the answer because their structure contains the sea of electrons courtesy of the initial metal that was used to mix with other elements.